Hey, I'm Jason.
And I'm AJ, and we're here at Excel Physical Therapy for the third episode of Transition to Running with Uphill Pursuits. And as always, we're 6 feet apart. So just a quick review here from the first episode. We've got a great infograph here out of Run Safe in Denmark, and they've got a great depiction here of how managing load and our load capacity could potentially leave us injured. So if you look at the bottom left-hand corner where the red line comes up across the right, that's the amount of load we apply with either running, stress, all the day-to-day stuff. And then our load capacity is that blue line starting in the upper left coming down. And we run into injuries and reactive responses when those cross or our load exceeds our load capacity. So the big question becomes is how do we make sure we don't exceed that capacity, and then ultimately to run more, run better, and perform better, how do we increase the capacity of our body? Well, one of the ways, and a couple of the ways we can do that is to modify some of our physical load limiters. So again, from the first episode, we talked about different loads, how they're managed, how we can track them, and how we can monitor them. We can also work on developing some specific strength in our body, and specific muscle groups will help us tolerate more load, help us disperse more load, and also help us move in a different fashion so that we utilize the big muscle groups to perform and provide those forces required for running. In the last episode, we talked about some essential mobility that we need in our legs, precisely the hip extension, ankle dorsiflexion, and great toe extension. Now, we don't need to be Gumby. There's really no good evidence to show that more mobility equals better performance or less injury. And even on the other side of it, if you have too much mobility, it becomes a lot more taxing to control that mobility. But as we go forward here in today's video, we're going to talk about some specific form skills, some running gait drills, and ways to control that running form. Again, to kind of review, we want to make sure that we're getting our leg behind us. When we don't get our leg behind us, we tend to overstride, bend at the back, utilize muscle groups to develop that force that we don't like. So the key here is getting that leg behind us with really good hip extension, ankle dorsiflexion, and extension at our first toe. And a key here is also make sure that we don't bend at the trunk, which is something we'll kind of continue to talk about throughout today's talk. So again, those non-negotiable three that we talked about last time are that pendulum arc-like swing. It allows our hip to get behind us in order to make sure our ankle and toe can get back there too and drive forward. We also need specific trunk control and stability. That's what you're talking about with a little bit of that control at our trunk. If we're going to push a lot and push really hard through our legs, we need to make sure we don't have a breaking point there. It's almost like if you were to shoot a cannon from a canoe or even put like a jet engine on a paper airplane, that force distribution isn't going to be tolerated well if we don't have a stable foundation to work from. And then also developing adequate tendon strength and power and elastic energy storage. So here's a good little kind of summary of a quote from Fallon in 2017 on running technique. And pretty much what that comes down to is that in the parameters within the running technique, the running economy and performance as well as stride and mechanics are really key things that we can work on to enhance running performance. So again, there's a lot that's involved. It's the mobility, it's the strength, it's the skill set, which we're going to talk about here about running properly, utilizing those ingredients to develop a really, really good, successful stride and gait. And I'm going to turn it over to Jason here to talk about that.
All right, so what can we do to enhance our form and increase our running economy or efficiency and really kind of prevent injury from occurring by decreasing the load, redistributing the load, and again, increasing our running economy? So we're really trying to address overstriding. I think that's the most common running fault that we see here in the clinic when we're dealing with injured runners. And that's our bias, is we're dealing mainly with people who are injured in here, and so that's what we're seeing, and we're seeing a lot of people overstriding. So again, we want to be able to get our leg behind us like these two guys are demonstrating at the top. And so we can do that through a couple different running drills, which I'll go over here. But forward lean, and then that's not leaning from the waist, but leaning from the ankles. Working on your cadence, or how many steps you're taking per minute, which is kind of indicative of how your stride length is. And then really focusing on driving through the hip. So to address overstriding, the most common technique that we'll use in the clinic here and is really effective is working on cadence or stride mechanics. And so to do that is you're going to basically use a metronome. There's lots of free metronome apps, and a lot of the watches now have a metronome app embedded in them as well. And what we want to do is basically increase the cadence to decrease our ability to reach out in front of us. And so you're going to be able to strike a little bit closer to your center of mass and then get your leg behind you more often and really decrease that chance of overstriding. So ideally we want to do 10% over your self-selected cadence or number of steps per minute you're taking. It's a little bit hard to calculate on your own. And typically we're going to be right around 180 beats per minute where that 10% over self-selected is. So I think that's a good place to start, is just at 180 beats per minute on the metronome. And what you're going to do is, after a good warm-up, turn on the metronome and then time your foot strikes to the beat of the metronome. So right, left, right, left, right, left. And do that for about 2 minutes, and then turn the metronome off for 3 minutes. And by doing it this way as a little bit of interval, is you're going to acquire that skill. And so you want to be kind of regimented with doing 2 minutes on, 3 minutes off, 3 to 4 times throughout your run, and then just turn the metronome off. And then utilizing that for a few runs in a row, probably 3 to 5 runs in a row, and then get a little bit more random of how you're doing the metronome on so that you actually maintain that skill. Now, ideally, you would want to be able to do this on a treadmill, but I know most of us don't have access to a treadmill, so this will work outside as well. You might just have the tendency to run a little faster at first. Another great way to enhance your running form and improve your economy is to get a good forward trunk lean. And there's multiple drills that we can do for this. Leaning tower drill, I'll go over in detail, and that's one that we utilize pretty frequently in the clinic, as well as a falling forward start. And then just thinking about running uphill and keeping a forward gaze. So for leaning tower drill, what you're going to do is, this is going to be a warm-up, and you're going to be a couple feet away from the wall and having your feet about hip width apart, knees soft, and then you're going to lean from the ankles. So again, we don't want to break at the waist. We're leaning from the ankles so that we maintain really good form in the trunk. And you're going to tip forward until you touch the wall, and somewhere between you tipping forward and you touching the wall is you're going to kind of find that balance point where you can hang out for a couple seconds, maybe gripping with your toes without your heels coming off, before having to release and fall into the wall. And where that balance point is the point you want to emulate while you are running. So to do this, again, doing this as a warm-up, start in a double limb stance, hip width apart, knees soft, doing about 10 reps there, then switching to a single limb stance, doing 10 reps on the right and then 10 reps on the left, and then repeating the whole sequence with your eyes closed. So double limb stance with your eyes closed, right, then left with your eyes closed as well, and then go for your run. And then while you're running, think about that same 2-minute interval where you're going to be just focusing on leaning from the ankles and trying to emulate that balance point that you were feeling during your warm-up. And again, then 2 minutes on, 3 minutes off, and repeating that a few times throughout the run. As far as starting your run, a good way to do that is instead of reaching out as demonstrated here, how most of us would start our run, just leaning forward until you have to take a step forward, and play around with that a little bit. But you can see right away on how if you're doing that forward lean start, fall forward start, you're going to start off with that good posture, forward lean posture that we want to get. And again, that forward lean posture really allows you to get that hip behind you or get your leg behind you for proper stride mechanics. Other things to think about with forward lean is just how your form is with running uphill. And so thinking about kind of running uphill, and we'll revisit this with driving through the hip, as well as just keeping your gaze forward. So trying to keep your gaze steady and forward while you're running, picking an object in the distance to concentrate on rather than looking down at the ground. And this really kind of helps you keep a little bit of a forward trunk lean, as well as really increase vertical center of mass excursion, or too bouncy of a run. And then lastly, as far as ways to think about getting your leg behind you and preventing overstriding, is really driving from the hip. Our glute max, or big muscle group on the back of the hip, should be our primary driver with running, and we want to be utilizing that big powerful muscle group to really maximize our performance, and again, get good running economy. So one thing you can think about here is, if you've ever had to run with a jogging stroller, which I have had many years of doing and thankfully I'm out of now, is you do have to push through the hip more when you're pushing a stroller. So thinking about pushing a stroller, pushing something like a shopping cart while you're running to drive from the hip. Again, running uphill, you really have to drive from the hip to get forward. Or just kind of think about, or someone with really good running form like Sir Mo Farah pictured here, and really wanting to kind of drive from the hip to get that leg behind you. And again, with all of these running drills, you really want to chop it up into just small segments through part of your run. One, to make running still enjoyable for you, where you're not just focused all the time on your skill development. And two, you're going to acquire that skill more quickly if you're doing small intervals for just part of the run throughout the week. So now I'll turn it over to AJ to wrap things up.
So, quick little summary on how to make sure we stay injury-free and improve our performance. Again, one of the big things that we talked about the last 2 times was managing the load, so stressing enough but not too much and making sure we recover. Really working on those non-negotiable 3, the hip extension, ankle dorsiflexion, and great toe extension, which leads us into and allows us to use the glutes more. So promoting the use of the glutes, using that good forward lean posture, not breaking at the back, not being wobbly here, which and all 3 of those kind of in combination with the other mobility will help us decrease the loading rate. And by decreasing the loading rate, we minimize the stress on our body and moderate some of that capacity. And ultimately, we improve our performance. So, thanks for joining us for the 3rd episode. A little preview for the next one. We'll be working on strengthening and some recovery strategies. I know Jason and I are looking forward to that one. That'll be the last video series in the episode. And then stay tuned for a Monday Night Live, potentially, with Uphill Pursuits, where we'll be live answering questions and discussing really anything you have questions and want to hear about. As always, follow along with us at ExcelPT on Instagram, also on our YouTube page, or reach out to Jason and I with questions as you feel like you have.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Happy running.